friends, I'd like to introduce my longtime friend from the Lucis Trust, Kathy Newburn, and she's been playing such an important role over the many years in that very valuable effort, which is the directly descending from Alice Bailey and Master Djwhal Khul. And I guess I've known Kathy since 1980. We always used to go running together, breathing that wonderful New York air, taking a little time off from lunch. You know, she still runs. I imagine running. But you know, recently, I think the groups can have very good relations, and I think we have very good relations with the Lucis Trust. I'm very happy about that, and a lot of that I put to Kathy and others who are in London and other places. It's the way it should be. Kathy is a wonderful astrologer with unique ideas, and always comes up with something new. But this is different. This is all about mobilizing for, mobilizing. That's my. I love mobilizing, but I forget the rest of the title. Okay. So Kathy Newburn.
I don't jog anymore.
Oh no! Don't admit it.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. I don't jog anymore, just to be honest. I fall too many times, so I gave it up. But anyway, it's wonderful to be here today with everyone and to be making these links, as Michael said, between two groups and to bring the blessings of all those working in the Lucis Trust to all of you. I just wanted to say a few words about this time, because we're working now, as you know, between the Wesak Festival, the Taurus full moon, which just passed, and working towards the coming Gemini full moon. And this is such a beautiful symbol in the heavens of the theme of your conference, of the essential brotherhood which exists between these two great lords, these two great teachers on the second ray line, the Buddha and the Christ. And I always think of this time as one of interlude. In a way, this whole month could be taken as a most important interlude, most extended interlude period of the spiritual year. And so we're encouraged during interlude times to move ahead by prayer and fasting. So we can keep that in mind of giving up those things in our personal lives which might be considered, in DK's word, non-essentials, making that sacrifice during this time so that we can provide a clearer chalice for the work that the Christ does in distributing the blessing from the Buddha to humanity. And we, as part of the new group of world servers, can hold an essential part in creating that bridge and more fully distributing those energies. For we know at Wesak the Buddha stands as the emissary from Shambhala. And at the Gemini full moon, the Christ stands as, you might say, the emissary of hierarchy to humanity. As we know, during the Gemini full moon, the Christ solidifies that relationship, that sense of brotherhood between himself and the Buddha by each year at a sacred ceremony sharing the Buddha's last sermon. And so I thought it might be helpful to just reiterate, I'm sure we've all read it a number of times, but just so we can hold some of the words that Christ holds so dear to his heart to share each year this message from his brother, the Buddha. The Buddha's last sermon was said to have been given on his deathbed. It seems he's talking principally to Ananda, his closest disciple. And he said that only by becoming plunged into a devout meditation of the heart could he be at ease on his deathbed. And he asked us to be as lamps unto ourselves. This was interesting. This was even before the start of the Piscean age and the sixth ray dispensation. He probably projected ahead into some of the shortcomings, perhaps, of this age. And so he encouraged us to seek salvation alone in the truth, not in personalities. To look not for assistance to anyone besides ourselves. But in order to do that, he said, we had to overcome the grief that arises from dwelling in the body, in this world of illusion. And how much more illusion do we have in our world today than when he spoke? We have to also overcome the tendency to become lost in the world of sensations. And how many more sensations do we have in our world today? And he also said that in our thinking, covering all three lower vehicles, we have to be strenuous to overcome the grief that arises from cravings due to ideas. And how many strong ideas do we have in our world today? And then he concluded that those who can do these things, who can hold fast to the truth as a lamp, seeking their salvation alone in this truth, not looking for assistance to anyone besides themselves. It is they, the Buddha said to Ananda, they who shall reach the very height. And then he added, but they must be anxious to learn. That was for Michael Robbins. That was part. So those words, it behooves us to ponder them and maybe interpret them a little beyond the obvious. When we consider the present period of mobilization that is assuredly taking place on our planet, we have to come to some understanding. We have some understanding of the subjective realities that are underlying this mobilization. We understand really, in some level, what we are mobilizing towards. Humanity is becoming responsive to the will aspect. A similar mobilization did happen at an earlier period in our planetary history, some 2,500 years ago in the East, under the dispensation of the Buddha. We're told in the teachings that at that time, the inpouring of the second ray light was the greatest in the East. And the Buddha and his coming forth, he was not alone. There were said to be hundreds of, the Tibetan calls arhats, hundreds of arhats, 900 he gives the number, who were alive and moving forward and developing an enlightened consciousness. It wasn't the Buddha alone. So now, at this later turn of the spiral, the light that was hovering over northern India at that time, the light of the second ray, is now pouring into the Western world. And perhaps as we move even further west, such as the United States and Hawaii, where I want to end up someday, that part of the world is really receiving the fullest influx of this second ray energy. And so we're moving towards a time when it's said in the teachings that the Christ is moving forward with 9,000 initiates. Of course, these are symbolic, perhaps, symbolic numbers, but we have an opportunity, those of us in the West, as Michael just said, to really bring this light to the world. And what the Buddha did was to strike a blow on the world illusion through his enunciation of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. This was a powerful blow. But this similarly now, on a higher turn of the spiral in the Western world, we have a similar opportunity to stand in whatever capacity we can to support the world teacher, the Christ, in his work of dispelling the glamour of our times. And so in order to do that most effectively, one of the most important things we can do is to work to dispel the glamours in our own lives, to not project them onto others, which we're so wont to do as human beings, to look at what is our particular glamour. We can use the techniques given by the Tibetan in the book Glamour, a World Problem. There are powerful meditations for the dissipation of individual and group glamour, and we can apply them in our lives. Okay. We're aided in our work of mobilization by the energies of the sign Taurus, the sign of the Wesak festival, the sign of the Buddha, the messenger from the East. But interestingly enough, and sometimes perhaps we forget this, the new group of world servers is also colored and ruled, we're told, by this same energy. So it solidifies a closeness that we have with the Buddha, and hence the importance of the Buddha's teaching in our world today. We're qualified by this higher aspect of Taurian energy. Taurus is a representative of the bull, right? And the new group is sometimes identified as the bull of God. And it's important for us to therefore ponder that symbol. It's one of the symbols that we're asked to ponder, the bull. It's quite a transformative symbol, for on the one hand, it's full of desire, impetuosity, anger, sloth, all of those lower aspects. But on the other, higher turn of the spiral, when we come into the rulership of the planet Vulcan, the first ray synthetic planet, the bull is transformed under the will, the spiritual will. It appropriates the spiritual will and uses that appropriation to drive forward and to tear asunder that which inhibits the ability to enter into the light. And when we view that from the perspective of the group disciple, we can see how powerful is this symbol and how powerful is the opportunity standing before this group. That clock is not working, so I'm not sure how much time I have left. So, okay. You'll just give me some clues or something. So what's being asked of us under these influences? One thing is to learn to live intentionally. For it is this intentional living that the Tibetan describes as that unbreakable, immovable determination that a situation shall be handled, that what is needed in order to release humanity assuredly must appear. So it's not very wishy-washy to live an intentional life. We have to have that will to believe that the vision and the goal of the plan for our planet, the opportunity of this time, will most assuredly appear. To cast out the doubt that we all succumb to, because the Aquarian age into which we're entering, as Michael was just discussing, its symbol, if we look at the symbol, on one hand, it can be the highs and lows of our own emotional lives, which will still be very strongly controlling us. And so during these times in the cycle, when we're on this downward cycle, like Heidi always reminds us of, those downward cycles, to maintain this assuredness that the plan will work out and that we ourselves will contribute to its manifestation. And just ride it out, because we know that it always passes. All things must pass. For mobilization is progressive. It involves a constant attuning of our instruments. As we know, mobilization is an effort not only of humanity on the physical plane, but it also extends to include a mobilization upon the higher planes, at the soul level. There's a vast mobilization being undertaken in the levels of hierarchy, Shambhala. Extra planetary energies are all mobilizing, we're told at this time, to help our planet. The solar logos is gazing at our planet, awaiting for us to move forward under the opportunities which are so abundantly available at this time. So we're not alone, and we have to remember that. The collective soul of humanity, composed of all the many individualized souls on their own plane, as I said, are organizing. They're in meditation deep, and from the center are directing their intention onto the physical plane to bring through into conscious recognition that which they have to do in alignment with hierarchical intent. The soul light is illumining the minds of humanity, breaking the barriers or veils within consciousness that prevent vision of the higher recognitions. Those who have long worked to foment material desire have always been quite organized in working upon the physical plane. That has been their strength. That has been their focus. But now, under this inpouring seventh ray, first ray dispensation, there is a sense that those who are working under the influence of the light are likewise becoming mobilized, are likewise learning to work more fully on the etheric plane, the plane through which the light of the soul is radiated. And there's an interesting aspect of this mobilization effort which doesn't always get highlighted, and I wanted to just speak a little bit about it today. We know that we are mobilizing for the externalization in preparation for the coming forward of the world teacher, for the new Aquarian age. But there's another aspect. It's related to this concept of rending. In the ancient archives, this time through which we're passing is said to be precisely one of rending. He says, when the mountains which have sheltered fall from their high places, and the voices of men are lost in the crash and thunder of the fall. We are therefore living through times wherein the foundations of the world as we know them are being shaken. And the subsequent crashing and thunder, whatever the cause or causes might be, are said to be potent enough that they will serve to arrest the attention of a distracted and distressed humanity. So it's something big. In the teachings, this rending is referred to as an opportunity that will be undertaken by those groups that are externalizations of the inner ashrams, in conjunction with humanity that is standing with massed intent. Together, these two groups will forge what's been called the fourth great rent. We are now, it would seem, preparing for this rending process. All the varied groups working together, each along their own line, dedicated to their particular aspect of the plan, are mobilizing. And the masses of humanity are standing with massed intent. They are no longer passively waiting for their leaders to give them direction. To rent is defined as to tear asunder, sometimes through violence. The kingdom of heaven, we're told, suffereth violence. The veils to be rent are those obstructions or obscurations in our consciousness which prevent vision and the ability to distinguish truth from falsity. It's a coordinated effort, this rending. For as we invoke the higher forces to come to the aid of humanity and the planet, that which lies on the other side of the veil is likewise ready to meet us. And as Michael mentioned, the primary forces that are awaiting our invocative appeal are that great triangle of energies that are standing behind the Christ as he prepares for his externalization. The first ray aspect of the avatar of synthesis, which Iris will probably mention because we're told that this great first ray being overshadows the General Assembly of the United Nations. And then the second aspect that overshadows the teacher is known as the spirit of peace, also sometimes called the spirit of equilibrium. And then the third, more closely understood by us perhaps, is the Lord Buddha himself. These three great lives, great beings, are there for us as we work collectively under the leadership of the world teacher to effect this rending. Over the long ages, we know, of our planetary life, many individuals have sought and followed the path of liberation, affecting what would be termed minor rents within these obscuring veils. Through that means, they were able to free themselves and consequently could become wielders of energy, able to tap into the source of power and project it downwards and outwards, thus releasing themselves and others from these veils. The Tibetan, as you know, in the beginning of each book, speaks of himself in that way, describing himself as one who had wrestled and fought his way into a greater measure of life than you and I, and therefore he had to stand as a distributor of that life, no matter what the cost. But he didn't say, I just harmoniously found my way into this higher level of consciousness. He said he wrestled and fought his way. But there are said in the teachings to be three primary individuals who affected the first three rents, because what we're preparing for now is the fourth great rent. The first of these was Moses, and each of these three individuals appropriated one of the aspects of the first ray energy, and Moses appropriated the will to law, we're told. The Christ penetrated in the Garden of Gethsemane into the center Shambhala, we're told, and anchored the will to love for the first time on our planetary life, establishing a direct line or thread from the highest to the lowest point. But the third great rent was made by an individual who is closer to ourselves, and perhaps we can understand a little bit more of what this process is about from his experience. I'm speaking of Saul of Tarsus as he was moving along the way to Damascus. We're told that he worked to forge a rent under the first aspect of the first ray, the will to synthesis. It's said by the Tibetan that the force working in Saul drove him through the veil which prevented vision and brought him a new revelation. And as a result of this, he was completely blinded for 3 days, for he was brought to the feet of the initiator through the effect of love, and thus he availed himself of the 2 earlier rents in the veil. St. Paul, as he became known, later wrote down a little bit about his experiences in one of the chapters in the Bible called the Epistle to the Hebrews. And the Tibetans suggest that we study this epistle if we want to understand a little bit about his process of rending the veils. So I took a look at it and to share with you a few things of what he said about this place into which he entered. He repeatedly described it as a place of rest, which is interesting. He encouraged us, therefore, to appropriate this dying consideration of taking a day of rest each week. He encouraged us in this process to take that day of rest. How many of us really do that anymore? But it's important to rest. I always try and tell Michael that, but he doesn't really listen. He said we had to be prepared for the experience. He said because the Word of God is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword. So we had to be prepared for this eventuality. Comes upon us quickly. And he said that as we pierce beyond the veil, beyond the obstructions and the opposing forces, that we enter into a new and living way. And he said that in order to do this, we had to gather together. For he said, it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And he projected into our day and time and spoke of the reappearance in this way. He said, in his last appearance, Christ shook the earth. He said, in his new appearance, he will shake both heaven and earth with his voice. The timing of the event of this rending, this fourth great rent, is of course subject to humanity's free will. And to prepare our consciousness for this event entails the techniques we have been given. We have many such techniques to prepare ourselves. But perhaps we could go deeper. And some of the speakers here have encouraged us to do so by learning to work more effectively with sounds and words, colors, as Dwayne always reminds us of, and vibration. This teaching on the fourth great Ren is found in Rule 10 for disciples and initiates in the Raisin initiation. And the Tibetan there tells us that one of the results of this fourth great rent will be an ability of the group to onward move within the sound. And that sound, he says, is the essence of that which is uttered forth by the great Lord, the Ancient of Days, who stands at the very center of the council chamber within Shambhala. So it's certainly, we are rending into that highest aspect, into that great synthetic whole. And sound, as we know, has both a shattering as well as and eventually leading forward into the revelation of beauty, the Tibetan says. So there's first a shattering and then a revelation into beauty. The shattering effects of sound were very apparent during the last century in the World War, in the release of atomic energy, which we're told had two primary effects, one perhaps positive and the other not so positive. The first effect being, it was said to open more and more people to the inner realities, to the reality of the inner realities. But this shattering of the etheric web also caused many problems in our world. A sense of the astral plane being opened up, and an inability, consequently, for many to distinguish between the false light of the astral plane and the light of the soul. And so we're dealing with that, especially those of us who work within the spiritual movement, because many people, many of us perhaps, are somewhat unable to distinguish the real from the unreal. We're challenged to see clearly. For this light masquerades as reality, making white black and black white. It's easy in this condition to lose the thread of truth amidst all the distortions that threaten our discrimination. The fourth rent will clear out the debris, some of the debris at least, of this lower three subplanes, so that the doors of perception will be cleaned and humanity will begin to see with greater clarity. This use of sound, as I think Dwayne always highlights as well, is a quality that will be much facilitated by the incoming of the fourth ray of harmony through conflict. As you know, one of this ray's overriding influences is as a bridging agent, setting forth a vibratory call on the part of those who can together move along the thread of the Antakarana bridge. Each of the different ray types are the agents whereby the differing sounds will combine and weave together to create those radiant strands that together create a collective cable, a planetary mandala, which, to quote the Tibetan, will present the medium along which can pass the fiery will and the predetermined purpose of deity. And this cable will bring about the reconstruction of the manifested worlds. And he says, in this task, each and every one of you can have your share. It's also helpful to remember that this rending process will not be undertaken by humanity alone, but will also be powerfully contributed to by the Deva kingdom, who are our parallel kingdom, for they have much to contribute, providing color to our sound and sound to our color. There's a fourth ray aphorism that I think speaks beautifully to this, I interpret it this way at least, to this cooperative possibility between the Deva kingdom and the human. It states, color the sound, sound forth the color. Produce the notes and see them pass into the shades, which in their turn produce the sounds. Thus all are seen as one. And he says the result of this realization is the quality of the synthesis of true beauty. We're not there yet, but perhaps as we learn to work more effectively with this Devic kingdom, although we're not supposed to really attempt it for 300 years hence, but as at least we contemplate and acknowledge their presence in our midst, we can learn perhaps to more fully utilize their contributions to this rending process. A couple of times on my way home from work in recent weeks, I've seen the same two musicians, street musicians, playing in the subway station, one playing a violin and the other a cello. And their music is so incredible that it arrests you in your tracks. It's their own contemporary classical, but the violinist in particular is such an amazing presence that the whole crowd is transfixed and you just stand there like amazing. They look quite poor, you know. The violin he's using is just falling apart, but there's so much power being emanated by the music. It's very amazing. And when I was listening to them, I was just marveling at the creative expression in humanity. And such a gift we have. It's part of our contribution, the creative, intelligent aspect of the three planetary centers. But it also made me think of something that I've reflected on before about Christ's statement that we would do better things than he, because he's going to the Father. And I've always sort of questioned that. We're told to question things, so really? We're really going to do better things than what you did? And so I was thinking about it, you know, there's so many wonderful contributions by humanity, the great writers, thinkers, wonderful books that have moved nations, that have started revolutions, that have expanded our consciousness, the musicians, the wonderful composers and artists who've given so much beauty to the world. Also all of the humanitarian work, which is so profound at this time. These are all amazing contributions, each in their own way have contributed to humanity's beautiful gifts to our planetary life. But still, I wonder, do these constitute greater things than what Christ did? And to me, it does not seem so. Christ's work moved the world and continues to move the world, has such a profound influence. But perhaps, I thought, because of the nature of the age into which we're moving, the Aquarian age of group work, that perhaps as we begin to appropriate this idea of group work, that together we will perfect the art of working as a symphony rather than solo artists. And therefore, under the idea of this fourth great rent, perhaps this could be one of those greater things. Because we're going to be working in conjunction with hierarchy and the forces standing behind them. And it's only with the participation of humanity, not only the new group of world servers, but as I said earlier, with the masses of humanity who are standing with massed intent, that perhaps with this cooperative alignment, we will do a greater thing. There will come to pass a time wherein the harshness and note of fear in our planet that's so prevalent at this time will begin to dissipate. Then we will approach that time, we're told in the teachings, when the cosmic heart, the heart systemic, and the little heart of men will begin to beat in unison. Let us do all we can to contribute towards that eventual realization. Thank you.